Hello everyone, and welcome to the New South Wales panel discussion on Australia-Japan hydrogen supply chains. As the moderator, it's my role to introduce the other speakers today, but let me start by introducing myself. My name is Peter Knight. I'm the Managing Director of Real Assets, and we're an Australia-Japan Business Cooperation Committee member who specialise in helping Japanese firms enter and expand in the clean energy markets in Australia. Let me proceed with an acknowledgement of country to recognise the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as traditional custodians of our land, Australia, as well as the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation that are the traditional custodians of the place we now call Sydney. Let me also acknowledge the Australia-Japan Business Cooperation Committee and JETRO for hosting this webinar. We are very lucky to have a record attendance or registrations for this event, which goes to show the popularity of the topic hydrogen supply chains, as well as the caliber of the speakers that we have presenting. I'd like to thank our panelists for participating. Today we have some very knowledgeable representatives from both government and industry at a national, state and local level to talk about the development of Australia-Japan hydrogen supply chains. Australia and Japan have had a long partnership in the development of resources and energy. And as we transition to renewable energy and future fuels, this partnership will undoubtedly evolve, but we're also sure that it will endure. As partnerships in energy trading, Australia and Japan have an existing playbook for the development of hydrogen supply chains, if we look to the development of the LNG industry over the last few decades. However, while some aspects of the energy trade will remain the same, the development of hydrogen will definitely be different. Some of the unique characteristics of hydrogen are that production and distribution can be co-located, allowing for new forms of storage and transport, and these technologies are currently being tested. So the purpose of our panel presentation today is really to look at how will both industry and government approach the challenges of building future hydrogen supply chains between our countries, and what pathways to a shared hydrogen future are being explored. Our first two speakers will give an overview from the national perspectives of each of the governments, and then talk about the collaboration that is taking place. We also have a New South Wales government perspective on plans within the state to support the growth of the industry, followed by two industry perspectives by major players in the hydrogen space. Let me now hand over to our opening speaker, Mr. Richard Andrew, President of the AJBCC, for some opening comments before commencing our panel presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people from whose lands I am speaking, and in particular to acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging, as well as any First Nations people who are present in this virtual gathering today. And on behalf of the AJBCC, we're delighted to be co-hosting this event today, jointly with JETRO Sydney and with the strong support of the Japanese Consulate-General in Sydney. I wish to thank both of those organisations for their involvement, and I also wish to say a particular thank you to my friend and active AJBCC member, Peter, and his company Real Assets Advisory and Financial. It's really his initiative that we're having this event today, and he's put a lot of energy into bringing it to fruition. So thank you very much, Peter. I believe it's very important that we understand fully the nature of the relationship between Australia and Japan. It's not just about individual transactions, it's about long-term partnership. The AJBCC is very committed to building that partnership in conjunction with all other organisations operating in that space. And so we're looking forward to more collaborative events in the not too distant future. So watch this space. Hydrogen's a classic example of how such a partnership approach is essential. And it's particularly timely that we're discussing it today, the day after the release of the IPCC's sixth assessment report, which really makes it very, very clear just how urgent the task of decarbonisation is, if we're to avert excessive global warming with all of its negative consequences. Clearly, clean hydrogen potentially has a vital role to play in that process. So it's not surprising that we have, as Peter said, attracted a huge amount of interest in this webinar. It is indeed a record for any webinar held by the AJBCC to date. But at the same time, we know that for all the potential, there are many challenges to be overcome. And it'll be really vital that industry bodies, companies, and governments all work together to develop this new industry. The AJBCC plans to have an ongoing program of work on hydrogen, and we'll be looking to work with other state governments to deliver similar events in other states, as well as the fact that we're working very closely with the Australian Hydrogen Council, whose CEO, Fiona Simon, is on the panel today, and also with the Australian Ammonia Energy Association to deliver an additional event on this topic in the margins of our annual joint business conference in October. I'm really delighted we've got such a great panel of speakers here today, and I'd like to thank all of you for your attendance and all of them for giving up their time to speak to us today. Without further ado, I'd like to pass over to them to start proceedings, but I would encourage you all to ask lots of questions. Thank you very much, and thanks again, Peter.
Thank you, Richard. Can I now hand over to our first speaker, the eminent Miss Fiona Simon, CEO of the Australia Hydrogen Council, who will talk to the topic, hydrogen developments in Australia. Please, Ms. Simon.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you, Richard. And it's a pleasure to be here as well. So thank you for having me. So the Australian Hydrogen Council, or AHC, is the peak body for the emerging clean hydrogen industry in Australia. Our objective is to grow the industry to have clean hydrogen as a key part of the energy mix. So we have 79 members at the moment. They are all businesses spread across many sectors. And the main areas for our membership are energy, transport, technology, and consulting. So I might just start very briefly with why hydrogen? Well, hydrogen's the perfect complement to variable renewable electricity and batteries. So with its long-term energy storage potential, hydrogen provides the versatility required by future energy systems in a carbon-constrained world. So the versatility of hydrogen also allows it to connect different sectors of the economy, supporting economic and energy security. And for Australia, a hydrogen industry shows particular promise, which was recognised in our National Hydrogen Strategy, which was released in November 2019. The National Hydrogen Strategy says benefits to Australia from a clean hydrogen industry could be as high as $26 billion a year in additional GDP by 2050 and close to 17,000 new jobs. And one of the measures of success in the National Hydrogen Strategy is that Australia is one of the top 3 exporters of hydrogen to Asian markets. And since that time, late in 2019, we've seen a fair bit happen. There's been significant funding announced, for example. Current federal government funding announcements for various hydrogen initiatives comes to about $920 million. We can then add around $325 million from the states and the territories, and there's more in train. So this is great, and we're really pleased about these announcements and the strong support for our emerging industry. However, there's still more to do to get to scale. We're seeing great interest in hydrogen in Australia from the industry. There's around 66 projects around the country at the moment in various stages of development. And many of these have received some of the funding or are going to receive the funding that I just mentioned. I do recommend, if you're interested, to use the website HyResource, that's HY Resource, which is hosted on the website of our government science agency, CSIRO. And HyResource has all of the currently announced projects across the full asset lifecycle and also releases periodic reports that provide a snapshot of the industry. At the moment, HyResource is showing 66 Australian projects, with 40 of them as being under development. And of the remaining 26, 6 projects are operating and 10 are under construction. Now, the projects are generally small scale, they're pilots and they're demonstrations, and a further 10 projects that are in advanced stage of development planning. At the moment, our Australian projects are weighted to gas blending, which is great because these are long-lived assets, our gas pipelines and networks, and planning is vital. We also are starting to see refueling, as well as obviously the important HESC project in Victoria. Our largest electrolyser is 1.25 megawatts at the recently opened Hydrogen Park, South Australia. There are going to be another 5 projects that become operational this year. We're going to see more refueling and more gas blending in those projects. And Hayes's exciting project in methane pyrolysis will also become operational. So by the end of this year, we're looking at over 2.7 megawatts of electrolyser capacity and a big jump in hydrogen production overall. Next year in 2022, another 9 projects are scheduled to come into operation. There'll be important progress that we can see there in renewable methane and a mobility project at a mine site, which is going to have 2 700 kilowatt electrolysers. And it really gets going in 2023. We get into larger electrolysers, primarily again with gas blending and with ammonia projects. So there are 3 10 megawatt electrolyser projects due that year. And these were the successful parties who received a total of $103 million in funding that was announced this year from ARENA, our renewable energy agency. So we are seeing green shoots appear. This activity is really getting the hydrogen ball rolling and will help us work out where the best opportunities lie. The problem that we continue to have, though, is that the hydrogen industry in its clean form is still pre-commercial. So the cost to make hydrogen is currently well above where it needs to be to compete with incumbent fossil fuels for different applications. You may have heard of H2 under 2, which is, for Australia, it's the stretch target of $2 Australian per kilo of hydrogen. That's what we're aiming for. We also need to develop the supply chains. We need to build the infrastructure and to find the vehicles and the vessels that we need to boost hydrogen use in Australia. So then how do we get there? How do we get the market going? For the Australian Hydrogen Council, we see the solution through a policy lens. We seek to get the policy settings in place to reduce the gaps in investment and knowledge and to kickstart the market. We have got a great start in Australia, and now it's time to better connect and integrate strategic industry development and the politics to move into larger scale projects. So I'm going to briefly outline some of the policy levers that can be pulled to create a market. So first of all, grant funding is vital in a pre-commercial space. We're fortunate to have ARENA in Australia, which provides funding to renewables projects, and it's been vital to the projects so far. We look forward to ARENA's future hydrogen work now that it's been refinanced. I also hope that we increasingly see partnerships between governments, such as contract for difference models, to see if we can create our regional market and get prices down. Government green loans play an important role, and increasingly as we start to see those green shoots and we step toward commerciality. We also need to find efficiencies, such as through hydrogen hubs and innovations like renewable energy precincts that can connect players in the same region and support jobs and regional economies. We are starting to see those green shoots in Australia as well. The Australian government has announced funding for 5 hydrogen hubs, and we're looking forward to seeing the next stage of those announcements. And regulation is vital, of course. And there's a huge amount to be done for regulation in hydrogen, from removing unnecessary barriers, such as legal definitions that can't account for hydrogen, to creating new market mechanisms that can allow the value that hydrogen and renewables bring against the fossil fuel incumbents. And regulation includes things like hydrogen certification, policy setting, like standards and targets to drive demand, and harmonised regulations where that is possible. And finally, social licence is key. It's about assisting communities and consumers across multiple markets with different timeframes. How do we have them feel comfortable and confident about the energy transition and hydrogen's role within it? And importantly for us, it's going to also be about working with communities about renewables and hydrogen projects in their midst. In Australia, realising the hydrogen volume scenarios that will get us to that large scale will mean huge construction and community engagement requirements over the coming decades. So to wrap up, we are at a defining point in history. As the world moves to decarbonise, we have the chance to boost our resilience to economic and environmental shocks through using clean and green hydrogen in the energy mix. This will take time and it requires coordination, and collaboration is everything. We're working hard with our members in Australia and with our partners here and globally. And today's session continues this important work. So thank you again for having me, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Our next speaker is going to give a perspective from the Japanese government's view of what's happening with hydrogen and collaboration. He's Mr. Yuji Ikai of the Japan Embassy in Canberra. Ikai-san has had a number of commercial roles prior to starting at the embassy, and he will be talking about Japan as the standard bearer of a hydrogen-fueled economy. Ikai-san, if I can hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Peter, for having me here. Hi, I'm Yuji Ikai. I'm a First Secretary with the Japanese Embassy in Canberra, Australia. And today, I'd like to talk about the Japanese government's serious commitment and devotedness of creating the hydrogen industry. So, in October last year, the Prime Minister Suga declared that Japan commits to net zero by 2050. And hydrogen plays a big role in realizing that goal. The Japanese government set numerical targets for hydrogen industry. So right now, it costs about $10 to, if you go to the refueling station and per kilogram. But so we wanted to decrease the cost. We set the target of $3 per kilogram by 2030 and less than $2 by 2050. We create demand of hydrogen. Right now, we use only less than 2 million tons a year, but we increase the amount to 3 million tons by 2030 and around 20 million tons, tenfold by 2050. So in order to realize that, so we do every effort to realize the target, and we create demand of hydrogen by deploying FCVs and demonstrate FC trains and FC trucks, and demonstrate large-scale hydrogen power generation. We conduct R&D for zero carbon steel and chemicals. And we also give tax credits for a company which invests in the manufacturing plant of fuel cells. We also accelerated production of hydrogen by scaling up electrolysis R&D to reduce cost. To secure the transportation of hydrogen, we scale up international hydrogen supply chain and develop hydrogen station for FC trucks. As an overarching enhancement, we create regional models like hubs through demonstration projects. As the potential of domestic production of hydrogen is limited, we expect much is imported from the overseas. So we emphasize the fostering the international collaborations, including with potential hydrogen suppliers. The Japanese government is committed to the quantitative targets of creating hydrogen economy. For demand side, so we installed a large power plants of hydrogen of 1 gigawatt by 2030 and increased that amount to 15 to 30 gigawatts by 2050. For combined heat and power systems, we currently have 343,000, and that increased to 5.3 million by 2030. For mobility, we currently have 166 refueling stations, and we will double by 2025 and increase to 900 by 2030. So we currently have 5,800 FCVs and increase to 800,000 by 2030. For fuel cell bus, we have 104, among which 100 was installed for Tokyo Olympics and increased to 1,200 by 2030. We have 250 forklifts and increased to 10,000 by 2030. The Japanese government's serious commitments can be seen by the amount of budget allocated to develop hydrogen industry. Even in this last 5 years, the amount allocated to hydrogen industry is more than doubled. Especially for this year, aside from the initial budget of 71 billion Japanese yen, as a supplementary budget, we created Green Innovation Fund, which is 2 trillion yen budgeted for 10 years, and to accelerate the 14 green growth target areas, including hydrogen. And the menu includes 300 billion yen of establishing large-scale hydrogen supply chain and $70 billion of electrolysis of water using renewable energy. Of course, we are not just wasting the resources, the huge amount of resources and money. So we get tangible results, like exhibited here. The number of FCVs have dramatically increased to 5,800. And for the local regional projects, in Fukushima, we installed the world's biggest class 10 megawatts electrolyzer and started operation last year. For other areas, the private businesses are voluntarily collaborating and creating an association to have access and use hydrogen in Chubu area or in Kobe area. For international hydrogen supply chain, the Japanese government assisted Brunei project, which carries hydrogen with MCH. And technologically, it's almost established. So we'll see how businesses are playing out. For Japan-Australian pilot project, HESC project, happening between Lateral Valley in Victoria and Kobe in western part of Japan, the first liquefied hydrogen carrier is doing testing operation around Japan right now. And we're expecting the inaugural navigation from Australia to Japan with liquefied hydrogen is happening by the end of this year. Oh, by the way, so I talked about the huge amount of budget allocated for the hydrogen industry, and among which a quarter or around 1/5 of the hydrogen budget is allocated for HESC project. So which can be seen that how Japanese government is serious and expecting Australia to supply hydrogen. And for hydrogen power generation, the Mitsubishi Power got a contract from Utah State in United States, a huge 500 megawatt of power generation, blending with 30% hydrogen starting by 2025 and 100% by 2045. And Japan and Australian governments agreed on a partnership on decarbonization. The both prime ministers in this June agreed on a partnership and agreed on jointly support initiatives, including clean fuel ammonia, clean hydrogen, and low emission steel. And the last month, the Japanese and Australian energy ministers followed up on this partnership. And they said the clean hydrogen and clean ammonia among the 3 priority areas to collaborate and advance initiatives by ahead of COP26 this November. So you can see that Japanese government and Australian government are strengthening collaboration and cooperation. So I expect everyone from the private sectors get on board with us as well. Thanks again for having me as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Kai-san. Our third speaker is Tim Stock of the New South Wales government. Tim has been deeply involved in the development of New South Wales hydrogen strategy. And he will be giving an outline of the much anticipated strategy for New South Wales in terms of how it plans to develop the local industry and also develop the infrastructure necessary to support export supply channels as well. If I can hand over to Tim.
Thanks, Peter, and also to Richard Takahara-san and Yuji Ikara-san, the Australian-Japan Business Cooperation Committee and JETRO for having me along today. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which I am today in Australia, and personally I'm on Walla Medical land and would like to pay my respects to all elders past, present and emerging. It really is a pleasure for me to be here today to update this audience on New South Wales Hydrogen Hub initiative and our development of our strategy. We understand the critical role that Japanese industries and organisations that are present here today will play in helping us in New South Wales reach a mature hydrogen industry. I'd also just like to acknowledge that New South Wales has just appointed a new Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner for Japan and Korea, Mike Newman, who is here to help, is on the call today and will help the hydrogen team and is working very closely with us to make sure that that engagement is real and can be as fruitful as possible. Today, I'll provide a high-level overview of where we see New South Wales and how we can leverage our strengths to build, scale quickly, and capitalise on the benefits that a hydrogen economy can provide to New South Wales. Next slide, please. So the New South Wales government, we've been really busy. So while we don't have a strategy, a specific hydrogen strategy out at the moment, we've been very busy with our foundational policy settings that support the emergence of our new hydrogen strategy and really lays the evidence base and the authority for the government and how we're going to approach kickstarting the New South Wales hydrogen economy. Importantly, we have a net zero plan that commits us to a 35% reduction by 2030 and really the pathway out to net zero by 2050, which is where hydrogen really is so critically important to our economy. It outlines hydrogen as one of these key pathways, one of 6 key pathways to decarbonisation, and includes a 10% hydrogen gas blending target by 2030. Then it was looking at how, as renewable energy and it's the decarbonisation of our electricity system is a critical step in the decarbonisation of our economy. So that infrastructure roadmap, which is the most ambitious in Australia, provides the framework to deliver one of the lowest cost renewable energy prices in the OECD. And of course, we're aware of how important that renewable energy price is into the creation of green hydrogen. So the Office of Chief Scientist in New South Wales then undertook a review to identify emerging opportunities and new industry growth that can come from a decarbonised world. And again, hydrogen was key theme throughout that document. And supporting the release of the roadmap, we looked at benefits of what happens if we have one of the lowest renewable energy prices in the region. And again, it was clear that hydrogen was a legitimate pathway to help decarbonise hard to decarbonise sectors and really the ability to open new commodities and growth markets for New South Wales. But that all said and done, we really need to have the funding and the stimulation from government and the support from government to enable these visions to occur. So the right level of and having the right level of funding. So we have had in our Net Zero Industry and Innovation Program released in the last couple of months, which is the $750 million funding program to support these emerging industries and lay the foundations that will reduce costs in the future and support the survival of carbon exposed industries. But I'll run through that program in a future slide. Next slide, please. So there's also a reason why we're so excited in New South Wales about the emergence of a hydrogen economy and the growth potential it has. And that's because we have a number of strategic competitive advantages as a jurisdiction. Some of these are quite similar in other Australian jurisdictions, but globally, we are very much believe that we have a significant competitive advantage. Firstly, we have the largest economy in both population and GDP in Australia, and this leads us to have the largest domestic market for heavy vehicles in New South Wales. We anticipate at least 40,000 heavy haulage vehicles will be required by 2050, and all of them, as we see, as the technology pathway will be hydrogen that provides the fuel for that fleet. We have the largest public bus fleet of 8,000 buses in New South Wales. And recently, the New South Wales government committed to transitioning this fleet to zero emissions by 2030. And we believe there'll be a material proportion expected to be hydrogen fueled of this bus fleet. We have long-standing ammonia production in Kooragang Island near Newcastle. We have only one of the 2 existing steel making plants in Australia, and we have a large gas customer base. All of these things are providing a significant domestic demand for hydrogen and related products into the future. Secondly, as mentioned, we'll have low cost renewable energy and the lowest 10% in the OECD. So this renewable and the infrastructure roadmap does 2 key things. It delivers 5 renewable energy zones and will reduce the connection and transaction costs to get us an additional 12 gigawatts of renewable energy in New South Wales to feed the creation of green hydrogen. We have existing hydrogen production and industrial bases already in New South Wales. So we already safely produce and use commercial quantities of hydrogen in the Port of Newcastle and Port Kembla. Both of these regions have well-established bases in safe materials handling, ammonia, steel, and heavy manufacturing. And critically, they have access to over 34,000 skilled workers in the Hunter and 9,000 skilled workers in the Illawarra. And so, and beyond that, these 2 locations, we have strategic manufacturing and large skill bases at export terminals. So the Port of Newcastle, we already export an energy commodity to key trading partners and majority to Japan. So, and that is better considering the hydrogen revolution. And so we believe that there is already a skill base and an institutional knowledge that comes from having these strategic locations and port locations with manufacturing bases that is critical for the emergence of a hydrogen economy. To help support the adoption and reduce costs of hydrogen adoption, we have a leading innovative planning framework through our special activation precincts. And this is where government is trying to do some heavy lifting to reduce the transaction costs and the time it takes to get hydrogen projects deployed on the ground. Next slide, please. So our vision is by bringing all this together, we will have a very strong domestic hydrogen economy, which will enable 2-way trading flows of capital, technology, IP, and skills with our North Asian neighbours, and really positions New South Wales to be a trading partner for the export of green hydrogen and related products. We believe that an integrated approach is critical to be able to drive scale quickly and really drive down the costs, as Fiona mentioned, on hydrogen to reach that export pricing as fast as we can. So this map really captures, I suppose, the interaction of our current different policy thinking and shows where the renewable energy zones will be to where we think hydrogen hubs or signaled hydrogen hubs will be located, and how that relates to water resources and how that relates to our special activation precincts. So it's important to note that, and on this map as well as, of course, the transport, the major transport and logistics routes and the linkages between our heavy vehicle and mobility sectors with the production of hydrogen. It's important to note as well, while there is a number of hydrogen hubs nominated in this map, we expect to be multiple hydrogen hubs across New South Wales, and I'll explain a little bit about how we'll get on to that in a moment. So next slide, please. Now, in order to reach our integrated hydrogen vision and support the growth of the domestic market, we have this $750 million war chest to be able to make this reality. So we split up into 3 streams. So first is a $380 million fund to help our heavy emitting industries transition to a decarbonised future. And this really enables us over the next 10 years to align with government support to critical infrastructure asset cycles and the replacement of those assets to more low carbon or decarbonised ways. And that, of course, will include hydrogen, the utilisation of hydrogen as an input in some of those key industries. We have $195 million to really support the commercialisation of new technologies that are related to clean or green energy and low emissions technologies. The idea is closing the commercial gap between and the death valley of those new emerging technologies and get them adopted by industry and in projects as soon as possible in order to help us reduce the costs moving out beyond 2030. And lastly is our $175 million low emissions industries fund. And this is where we have publicly already committed to a minimum of $70 million to the development of hydrogen hubs in the Hunter and the Illawarra. So, and importantly, hydrogen will be considered across all of these three streams within this war chest. So the next slide, please. So in terms of our hydrogen strategy and hub initiative, so we're really developing our strategy to play to our strengths and maximize government investment to stimulate and grow scale quickly. So we need to get to the right hydrogen price points that unlock new markets and create positive investment cycles. So we're going to create the right ecosystem by doing both economy-wide actions, but as well as we're going to be focusing on specific sector end use actions to be able to really drive a cohesive approach in the hydrogen market. So some of the areas as well we'll be working on is skills development, standards, regulatory work, social license, and importantly, helping the collaboration between government, industry, and researchers. It'll be aligned with the National Hydrogen Strategy in that it will be keeping to the key themes of phasing and flexibility to ensure that we can adjust and adopt the right technology depending on which industries tend to emerge faster than others, and making sure that we can be adaptable. As mentioned, we're publicly committed to $70 million to support green hydrogen hub development. We believe that the critical characteristics of a hub will need to be the incorporation of multiple end users in these hub locations and offtakes. They need to demonstrate a pathway to increasing demand for hydrogen and the capacity to scale quickly. And so, as mentioned earlier, while the focus will be on the Hunter and the Illawarra, we will be opening the EOI and for this $70 million program across New South Wales. And importantly, we want to see how the funding for the hub initiative can stimulate the rollout of a refueling infrastructure. So to link the hubs and the generation of hydrogen and how that can be linked to the unlocking of the mobility sector. Now, how we're also, in terms of collating the demand, if we could go to the next slide, please. So the next slide, please. There's the collaboration platform. So we are launching an innovative approach to market collaboration. We know that we need industry to work together with government, but also with other offtakes and different industry end users that may not be used to working together. So we really want to be open for business and help facilitate those discussions. So we're launching within the next couple of days our collaboration model. And this is really, I suppose, a space for interested parties that are interested in the emergence of a hydrogen economy to put forward or to get access to sophisticated market players or to get access to different technology providers, but also those that could be access to other demand offtakes. So we'll be encouraging our government agencies to put on their potential fleets, for example, or looking at other hydrogen demand and being able to connect and aggregate different hydrogen offtakers with potential hydrogen providers. It will also help to educate those that are in the industry, those that are potentially outside or coming on this journey for hydrogen in the future, to make sure that that occurs. Next slide, please. So in terms of the next steps, so we'll be launching the collaboration platform imminently. And if people on this call would like to be involved, please reach out to the facilitators of this event or to myself to get access to that collaboration platform. We hope to release the hydrogen strategy and our hub EOI for the $70 million program by early November time. So that means that we'll expect detailed applications around March time, but really critically, hope to have first hydrogen production by June 2024. So just a key overarching message that I want to portray in this presentation is that New South Wales is open to business. We really want to get this economy kickstarted. And so please contact myself, as I said, in terms of getting access to that collaboration platform and really starting that discussion to prepare for the launch of the EOI. That's it from me. Many thanks, team.
Tim, thanks very much for that overview of the New South Wales government approach and what's forthcoming in terms of the planned strategy. I'd like to now hand over to our next speaker, who is Nakabayashi-san. He is the head of MHI Australia, and he's going to give us a Japanese industry perspective on the energy transition and how Japanese industry is looking at hydrogen opportunities in Australia. Nakabayashi-san, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter-san.
Thank you.
So I would like to, my name is Nakabayashi. I'm Managing Director of MHI Australia. So today, thank you for the opportunity to speak at this webinar. So I'd like to explain the energy transition of Mitsubishi Heavy Industry Group. Sorry. Cannot move now. Okay. So this is one of the picture maybe you often see. Decarbonization of society is expected to accelerate in the future. However, it is also true that there are challenges in realizing hydrogen society. One of the first challenges to realize hydrogen society is that the high cost of hydrogen production increases the burdens on society. Because hydrogen gas does not exist in nature and use a large amount of energy to produce it. Production costs are inevitably high. Next, in order to establish hydrogen society, it is necessary to establish a transportation and storage infrastructure, in addition to manufacturing facilities such as water and electricity equipment. In same case, existing gas pipeline can be used on continent, but in remote area, storage infrastructure is also required along with the establishment of transportation method. Hydrogen is very delicate substance and careful handling is necessary. So carrier conversion to ammonia is effective. So this slide plot our company's technology in hydrogen supply chain from the production of primary energy for hydrogen production to hydrogen product, transportation, storage, conversion, and utilization. Our company provides wide range of technology required to build a hydrogen supply chain from upstream to downstream, making a significant contribution to the realization of hydrogen society. I would like to briefly explain the technology our company possesses and project it is currently undertaking to build a hydrogen value chain. First is the MHI activity in Australia. Our company has decided to take a stake in H2U investment, which is developing green ammonia project in South Australia. We are working to decarbonize neighboring industry by producing green hydrogen and ammonia using the abundant renewable electricity in Australia and using them as fertilizer and fuel, and by supplying byproduct oxygen to steel works. If we can scale up this business, we will be able to export green ammonia in the future. Our company hydrogen gas turbines are characterized by their ability to convert existing power generation facility using conventional natural gas fire gas turbine into hydrogen boilers with minimal modification, thus reducing investment cost. We conducted operational test of hydrogen engine that was improved from the conventional diesel engine, gas engine, and succeeds in finding conditions for stable combustion for clean hydrogen without CO2 emission. So we will start commercializing carbon-free power generation using hydrogen and ammonia by 2025. As you can see, we have begun to work on the hydrogen value chain overseas. This is because, as mentioned earlier, there are problems in mass transportation and storage hydrogen. And there is possibility that its practical application will proceed in Europe and the United States, while gas infrastructure such as pipeline are available. On the other hand, in place like Australia and Japan, where there are no pipeline, what approach are those to realize hydrogen society? The MHI group recognized that the use of ammonia is an effective first step toward the hydrogen society. When hydrogen is converted to ammonia, it's liquefied with only small amount of pressure during transportation, and liquefied ammonia can also be transported existing LPG tankers, making it a very promising mean as a carrier for transporting hydrogen. Our company also developed a technology to separate hydrogen from effective ammonia or ammonia by utilizing the waste heat from gas turbine. Ammonia is also expected to be used as a fuel for coal-fired thermal plant, as well as for ships. Our company also working to realize this goal. In this way, we believe that the use of ammonia, which can be used as a hydrogen carrier and can be burned directly as a fuel, will enable the transaction to the hydrogen society while reducing the impact on economic efficiency. So this is dream technology. Green steel. In April, the hydrogen-based fine ore reduction pilot plant developed by Prime Metal Technologies as commissioned in Australia. First test was successful. So this project, so our typical, so famous project, MHI group in the world. So finally, I prepare 1 minute for video, so please watch it. how to, sorry. New share. Can you? Is it? Sorry. Peter-san, can you see?
Nakabayashi-san, I can see it at the screen, but I don't think the video is showing yet. Oh, it's just started.
Okay. Sound is okay?
I'm not getting sound at my end. I'm not sure if others are.
So I'll explain. Sorry. And this is actual situation in Mitsubishi Heavy Industry. Now is that we are already testing for the real plant. It's the same scale model for real same pressure and same press, same for the same pressure and same temperature, the real equipments. So this is high pressure elemental combustion testing facility. This one.
Excellent. Nakabayashi-san,
yes.
I think we'll have an opportunity with the materials to share those with the audience after the webinar is completed.
Okay, yes, that's a finish. So finally, there is no single path to carbon neutral. So if you are interested in MHI technology and activity, so please contact us. Let's discuss about best way each other. Thank you so much, Peter-san. I'm finished.
Thank you very much, Nakabayashi-san. I'd like to hand over to our next speaker now. Gabriel Sycamore heads up the renewable gas business within Jemena, who's a major player in the development of the hydrogen industry in Australia. She's going to talk us through accelerating the renewable gas transition and what that means for New South Wales. Gabrielle, if I can hand over to you.
Hi, Peter, and thank you very much. Just starting my video. So thank you very much for having me today, and I very much look forward to talking to you about the New South Wales gas network experience. Just as Peter said, we will be providing some of these slides, so I might skip through them, but it's on the basis we'll provide them to you for your consumption a little bit later. So I'm the General Manager of Renewable Gases for Jemena, and I would also like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which I sit today, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. Just as we get started, and I might skip to the first slide if we can, Jemena owns and operates energy infrastructure assets valued at over $11 billion across the east coast of Australia. We supply millions of households and businesses with essential services every day. I'm responsible for leading the team that's working hard to accelerate the integration of new sources of renewable gas into our New South Wales network in collaboration with industry and government partners. And we're also exploring future network services that will be required by our customers in a decarbonised energy market. Gas infrastructure provides critical flex and redundancy in Australia's energy system and provides diversity of supply and is very reliable. Jemena's gas network plays a critical role in New South Wales's energy mix by providing responsive and reliable energy to over 1.4 million customers, both business and residential, and across 25,000 kilometres of buried pipeline that are often out of sight and out of mind. The network delivers about 95 petajoules or 26 terawatt hours of energy per year and delivers a reliable peak capacity of over 20 terajoules per hour, which is the equivalent of 5.6 gigawatts. And that's typically on a winter's evening outside of solar production. Gas infrastructure connects flexible gas-powered generation that plays a critical role in keeping the lights on during extreme events in the wholesale energy market. So just to sort of draw you in, this slide is coming from an Energy Networks Australia pack that gives a nice snapshot of the number of homes that are connected across Australia, but equally the number of appliances and the amount of energy delivered to our homes. So it's a really useful piece of information to keep, I think, the size of the prize front of mind when we're talking about the role that renewable energy such as hydrogen can play. On the next slide, I've tried to just sort of capture what many of us will already know, but essentially that there are now emissions reduction targets across all states and territories in Australia. And in New South Wales, of course, the government launched its net zero plan, which is seeking to reduce carbon emissions by 35% by 2030 and put New South Wales on a trajectory to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And that's particularly relevant to me because this is the state in which my gas network is supplying those 1.4 million customers. So we're working very closely with the New South Wales government to play our role and to support them in their target to reach 10% renewable gas or hydrogen in the network by 2030. I also wanted to briefly touch on what our customers are telling us. And so on the next slide, I've just sort of captured a few points. So in the last couple of years, we've undertaken quite extensive customer research as part of setting our access arrangement or our 5-year plan with the Australian Energy Regulator. And customers were really clear. They're expecting us to innovate together with other parts of the industry and government so that they can continue to confidently use gas over the longer term and support the move to the low carbon future, but balancing affordability at the heart. So whilst they're looking to us to work together to find solutions, there is an expectation that we will be doing everything we can to minimise unnecessary excessive costs on those consumers. And so that again is something very front of mind as we're looking at what our energy solutions for the future need to be. The next slide, I'm just giving a bit of a snapshot of all the different elements that we'll be looking at from a gas distribution network. And I'll leave it to you to read this one in your leisure after the session and skip to the next slide, which is probably one you'll find quite interesting. This is our overview of the potential decarbonisation pathways for the network in New South Wales. And so I wanted to sort of start here and give you a chance to look at the different forms of renewable gases and feedstocks that can be part of the solution. Jemena is challenging the notion that the only way to be 100% renewable is through electrification. And as I said, our customers have told us they want to purchase verified and accredited zero emission green gas as easily as they can renewable electricity. So to give a sense of the opportunity, we estimate that there's approximately 30 petajoules of biomethane readily available near our network, which is the equivalent to the output of 76 gigawatts of solar, and enough energy to supply Jemena's residential gas customers with a green gas. So in partnership with Green Power and Energy Networks Australia, we're using our Malabar biomethane project to design a renewable gas certification scheme to allow households to voluntarily opt into buying gas produced from renewable and zero emission sources. Green Power will work with domestic and international stakeholders to ensure certification is independent and transparent and give customers confidence that their action has the intended effect of lowering emissions and they receive value for money. And in the short term, it will mean customers can lower their carbon footprint without making changes to the way they use their energy and their gas appliances. And in the long term, ensure that gas remains affordable through the decarbonisation using existing gas infrastructure without the need to build new alternative forms of energy infrastructure. And ultimately, we're seeking to have pricing that is competitive with green electricity equivalents. Economy-wide emission reduction ambitions, including the energy transition, will be best realised at least cost to our consumers if both electricity and gas have decarbonisation pathways. And for this to occur, we believe we need a level playing field between renewable electricity and renewable gas. And Jemena has quite publicly been calling for the introduction of a renewable gas target. And in the words of our managing director, this is intended to jumpstart the gas sector to truly commercialise zero emission gases such as hydrogen and biomethane and make them available to Australian homes and businesses at scale. And just as the federal renewable energy target has enabled Australia to become a world leader in renewable electricity, we believe a renewable gas target can drive low cost emissions reduction for our customers and those industries in hard to abate sectors that are increasingly demanding green energy. In the short term, we believe this will make the transition to a low carbon future more seamless and enable Australian homes and businesses to continue to use their gas appliances as they do today. The next slide is just to give you a bit of a snapshot on our Western Sydney Green Gas project, which hopefully many of you will be familiar with. This is a $15 million project co-funded with ARENA that will see us injecting hydrogen into our secondary gas network up to 2% to enable us to learn and understand network readiness perspectives. We're also going to be using that gas to generate a gas microturbine. We've got a fuel cell, and we'll be working with the local area electricity network Endeavour and Origin to look at how we can provide grid firming services utilising hydrogen. We'll have a high pressure buffer store that's got approximately 4 to 7 megawatt hours of storage in it. And as per our announcement this week, we've also signed an agreement with Corgas to provide them with green hydrogen for transport and industry, which is really super exciting. I'll let you have a look at this slide in your time, but I've got a couple of other slides that just give you a bit of a snapshot of what the site looks like today. Unfortunately, the project's been hampered on many fronts. Not only has the COVID pandemic come to play, we've had storms and flooding and all sorts of exciting things. So whilst the project is complete, those last little commissioning steps do require some specialised resources to be able to move around the state. And until COVID restrictions are lifting, we'll be a little bit delayed. So we're looking forward to having a launch event later this year when COVID restrictions allow us to. The next slide also just provides a beautiful sunset picture of our buffer storage pipeline that's been painted a beautiful green. And we believe that's the first renewable gas pipeline in Australia, which is also very exciting. The following slides provide a bit of information on the Malabar biomethane injection project, which is us again partnering with ARENA and Sydney Water to have the first biomethane injection to a gas network in Australia, and also to support the development of that green gas certification pilot with Green Power. Both really significant enabling steps that will hopefully de-risk future projects and encourage people to invest in this space. The next slide was really just a reminder that we are doing quite a bit of work at the moment, again, with New South Wales Government and Sydney Water, Endeavour and others. And that's really looking at how we are developing energy and water solutions or utility solutions for the Western Parkland City with the new Nancy Bird Walton Airport, the Aerotropolis and other exciting precincts. It's an interesting case study because it is a reminder that we are planning and building infrastructure today that will be relevant in a modern city of the future. And we really do need to be thinking about those solutions. And whilst appliances and different applications may not be ready yet, I don't think it holds us back from planning for these cities of the future and where we can optimize, water, electricity and green gases together to find these modern solutions to enable us to have exciting cities of the future that are sustainable and affordable. So I might pause there and thank you all for listening to me today and look forward to seeing some of the questions coming through.
Gabrielle, thank you very much for your presentation, and to all the presenters for what I think has been a really interesting set of perspectives around how governments and industry are approaching the opportunities with building out Australia-Japan hydrogen supply chains. We've certainly had quite a few questions, which shows a high level of audience interest. I think that there's a theme here around interest in New South Wales looking at different colors of hydrogen, so green hydrogen versus blue versus brown. Tim, I'd like to direct that question to you initially. If you could give some feedback to our audience as to what New South Wales' view is about the different colours of hydrogen.
Yep, certainly, and it's a good question, and so I'll answer it this way. So while our overarching strategy and framework is somewhat technology agnostic, we are certainly going to be agnostic in that strategy. What I would say is that the funding associated with the Net Zero Industry and Innovation Program, which is the $750 million, and the kind of support that will help stimulate those right areas of the supply chain, is linked to our decarbonisation goals. So therefore, for the expression of interest in those types of hydrogen hub projects, they will certainly be looking at renewable green hydrogen. So it's that is where the New South Wales government thinks that the future in terms of setting up the supply chains and getting the costs down will come from, needs that stimulation for the renewable hydrogen. So yeah, that probably answers that.
Sure. I'm not sure if any of our other speakers have comments on that, but if not, then there's another sort of, I guess, two-part question. One is around, has New South Wales already started to look around regulations governing the safety for transporting and handling hydrogen? And I think the second part of that, where I'd be interested in directing it to Fiona Simon, would be at a national level, what is being looked at that. But Tim, if you could maybe take that one from a New South Wales perspective as well.
Yeah, certainly, and so absolutely. There's a couple of ways that I'll answer this. So first is that, yes, we are very cognizant of the role of safety and the transport and distribution of hydrogen as critical to the social license for hydrogen economy to evolve. So we, in New South Wales, our sister unit to the hydrogen team is the gas regulating team, and they're obviously they're obviously wanting to make sure that any blending or hydrogen injection is done safely, and that hydrogen can be used. So they are certainly involved. We are a contributing member to the Future Fuels CRC, which is doing a significant amount of research into the safety and regulations for hydrogen use and use in appliances and all the different applications on how on making sure that safety is in that consideration, including a regulatory review.
Understood. And Fiona, from a national perspective, clearly we're going to have harmonized standards across states. Is the Hydrogen Council also looking at this issue of ensuring standards around safety and of transport and storage?
Yes, we are, more as a participant and observer in others' processes, because it's been really great to see. So Standards Australia, for example, is doing excellent work, and we have a few representatives on there, but it's really industry and Standards Australia bringing everyone together to look at mirroring ISO standards in particular, and there's already been a release of a number of standards, which really then it's a matter of having regulators adopt them. The regulators are really engaged as well, which is fantastic. So there's a couple of jurisdictions that have already developed sort of cross-sector regulatory meetings about hydrogen. So really the appetite is there. I think the challenge with regulation is that we're dealing with this innovative and new environment. And I think things like stationary fuel cells, they bring up complications. That's an example, can bring up some complications, because in any one jurisdiction, well, is that a gas appliance or is it something else? And so everyone's working through these details, and really the challenge is the versatility of hydrogen. So the positive aspect of that versatility is that it can do so much, we can connect different sectors. And the challenge that comes with that is you can't really talk about hydrogen regulation per se, because these are all these different ways of making it, different ways of storing it, and different ways of using it. So there's quite a lot of engagement on the regulatory front. There's also connected to that national work being done on skills and training. So understanding what will be the future workforce needs and how again, do we keep people safe? And there's work there that's being led by the South Australian government with on behalf of all of the governments under the National Hydrogen Strategy, where they're also working with emergency service providers and has definitely kicked off some really good work there to make sure that when we hit that commercial point, we have the people and the infrastructure as well, the social infrastructure to cope with it.
Thank you. And maybe just before moving on to our next question, we've had a couple of around the certification of green gas and trading, but Ikai-san, from a Japanese government perspective around safety standards for transporting and storing hydrogen, are there any insight you can give us as to how the Japanese government is thinking about these issues?
Yeah, so Japanese government is also closely working with the industry and how those regulations should be amended or so. But for now, for example, for FCVs, so they incur two regulations. First, as a carrier of anything, and the second, for around gases, so maintaining gases. So, but both is administered by this different ministry. So it makes the consumers cumbersome procedure. So that's what the Japanese government is thinking about deregulating right now. Yeah, that's one example, but yeah, we need to come up with a lot of solution for all the relevant regulations. Yeah.
Thank you. And there's a lot of interest in the green gas certification and what that means for potential trading. Maybe, Gabrielle, your company is kind of one of the key advocates and sort of leading users of this new scheme. Could you give a little bit of a flavor as to how it's rolling out and how you think it may be able to extend further, particularly into export markets in the future?
Thanks for the question, and I might also tap Tim Stock if he's still online to join me on this one, because we're partnering with Green Power to design the scheme. It's currently in its pilot phase, and I think it's fair to say there's a lot of consultation happening on the design to make sure that it's really robust, fit for purpose. And at this stage, I think still getting that feedback to really design something up to communicate further. What I can say though is we would like to see that where reasonably possible, it can align with existing certification for electricity and other certificates, so that it is easier for people who are trying to navigate what green gas certification might be relative to a green electricity certificate. I think it's fair to say that the network side, I think it's quite easy to take meter a feedstock in and meter it at a delivered point where a consumer will be consuming that gas and therefore be able to have a certificate that mirrors that transaction. I'm not sure if there's anything further, Tim, we can really share at the moment on what it might mean from an export scale process.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I'd add, Gabby, is that the idea of this pilot is to work out how those systems and what, from a consumer's perspective, is robust enough to have credibility on the value of the certificate, right? So that's why this is really important for us to do. I think by process it should be fairly straightforward, as Gabrielle mentioned, but it really is linking into that wider certification piece. So there is a green gas piece, but there's also a hydrogen piece, and I know the National Hydrogen Project team has undertaken a generation of origin survey and work that they're undertaking, and so we're very cognizant from both Green Power and this renewable gas certification and making sure that we are testing the kind of processes and frameworks that can be used. For example, the interaction with the clean energy regulator as current existing frameworks in Australia for this type of certification, and how we can make sure that that there is sufficient amount of information and that is the most effective way to implement a scheme like this that provides a transparent and credible way that people can assign the environmental value to a green gas, whether that is hydrogen or biomethane or other sources of gases. So eventually it'll be very critical to that export market in terms of the generation of origin. And so we're just making sure this project is dovetailing into the work in that wider hydrogen generation of origin scheme. So rest assured that we're trying to have a national focus on this to enable that the learnings that we get from this project into that can be applied into an export or be fungible in international markets. So
Sure. I'm not sure if any of our other panelists have any comments on that. But if not, one of the other questions that we received earlier was around the whole transition process to hydrogen. And in particular, what does this mean for existing plants using LNG and other fuel sources? Nakabayashi-san, this may be an interesting question for you, given that MHI is supplying equipment both to existing power producers and to new users or users of future fuel as well. From your perspective, how do you see the transition happening from users of existing fuels, say LNG, to hydrogen? Nakabayashi-san, I think you might be on mute.
Okay. I think that is so hydrogen business is so what is important? That is the off-taker is quite important. That means how to final access to off-taker. That's so which kind of approach is better. Then so we will so try so this kind of using this kind of LNG tanker or this kind of ammonia, this kind. This is not so one way. Just we try so now, but so we believe this MHI believe so our approach is better than the other side because we tried that kind of movies. We tried many times. Real so testing. That is quite important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Understood. So clearly, there's a lot of trial that needs to take place before hydrogen is going to be ready to be commercialized. And then the idea will be that you can start to deploy that in some of the existing plants as a hybrid solution. Is that correct?
Yes, but so because so in off-taker is not one style. That's off-taker. Many different kind of people stay. That kind of people we have to approach. Then we prepare this kind of technology. That is quite important. Because so everybody, they want to ship to Japan. However, in Japan, so how to use this kind of energy. This is quite important point. Now, MHI already prepared that kind of business model in Japan. That is important method. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you. And Richard, one of the other questions we received earlier was specific to Hunter Valley. Again, lots of interest in what's being announced in New South Wales. Could you elaborate any more about what's going on with the Hunter Valley? And I think an associated question with that is what would happen in Port of Newcastle. You might want to comment on Port of Kembla as well. Tim, are you okay to comment on that?
Sorry. Apologies. I was busy typing away an answer to the Q&A question. Peter, was it regarding the development of a hydrogen hub in the Hunter? Sorry, do you mind repeating the question?
Yes, one of the questions we received a little earlier was around the Hunter Valley, and in particular, does that link into Port Newcastle? And at the same time, you might want to speak
about the two hubs. Yep.
Kembla.
Yes, of course. So thank you, and sorry, apologies for that. But so yes, the Hunter and both Port Kembla have different characteristics, but very strategic, important characteristics that would enable the emergence of a hydrogen hub. So that's why when the minister announced in September about the hydrogen hub initiative, it wasn't an accident that he mentioned the Illawarra and the Hunter as those specific areas. The Port of Newcastle, of course, is a critical location within that. We are a bit more agnostic in terms of the locations and want the market to come to us with the best, I suppose, approaches on how they're going to develop a hydrogen hub in the Hunter and the Illawarra. So we are a bit, we are a bit agnostic as to however, that said, that we're very cognizant of the strategic merit of being near the Port of Newcastle, and indeed, what the role that the Port of Newcastle could play, and that is also same can be said for the Port Kembla region. And arguably, they've both got industries that could be potential offtakes for hydrogen in the initial emergences. We understand there will be key critical roles to have large anchor offtakes for hydrogen hub development. That, but again, goes to my point, as multiple potential offtake users in those locations, we also are aware that there are a number of different offtakes in those two different locations. So we're very excited to release our EOI and hopefully get some. We are aware of a number of the consortia that are already forming around those two locations and potentially others in New South Wales. But that's why we also really encourage the interaction with our collaboration platform. That will help. We're, as seen in my presentation, we are specifically trying to form groups around both the Hunter and the Illawarra, as well as other locations, but to really encourage the engagement of different organisations on this call that may be interested in being part of a hub or working out where their role may fit to create the best outcome to reach our objectives of reducing hydrogen price in New South Wales.
Excellent. And Tim, I'm sure you can't give specifics, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, with the consortia that you're starting to see form up, are you seeing Japanese interest in those consortia?
Yes,
getting any partners in?
Yes, absolutely. And so that's why I'm very glad to be on the call today. I think that, and again, it goes back to what I think will be where New South Wales is. We want to be able to support the emergence of a domestic economy in order to be able to do that too. We're not going to be able to, we don't have in Australia currently the technology and the enabled to do this transition for the infrastructure required at the level that we need it. And that's going to come from key trading partners. And so we hope from the likes of the Japanese. So we hope that by being able to support that domestic industry, having those two-way trading flows of technology and partnerships that will set us up to be able to, once the price gets down, to then start exporting to those trading partners. So to answer your question is yes, and we hope that will be more fruitful moving forward.
Thank you very much. I think we've certainly got lots more questions. Unfortunately, we do not have lots more time to kind of wrap it up. We will be sending out a survey at the end of this webinar, and I'd encourage any of the audience that have follow-up questions, either in English or in Japanese, to submit your questions, and then we'll be sharing those with the panelists after this webinar so that they'll have a chance to respond back to you. I think we're pretty much at the end of the time, so I'd like to hand over to our final speaker, Takahara-san, who heads up JETRO and has been our very kind host for this webinar event.
Thank you, Peterson. My name is Masaki Takahara, Managing Director of JETRO Sydney office. I'd like to extend my sincere appreciation to distinguished panelists and participants for being a part of today's webinar. It seems like we can have a discussion for hours, as hydrogen is a current hot topic. We are closing today's webinar shortly, but we'd like to continue the effort to share the latest information on the industry in cooperation with AJBCC. One of the characteristics of Australia's hydrogen strategy is that it regards hydrogen as a future export industry. The hydrogen strategy of other countries focuses more on domestic decarbonization. Australia is blessed with abundant renewable energy resources and has built long-standing trust with Japan as an energy supplier. In addition, the political economy is stable, the investment environment is excellent, and the location is close to Asia. We believe that Australian hydrogen will become more important for Japan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Japanese companies have been participating in many hydrogen projects as Australia has been an important energy supplier for Japan and has a lot of potential on hydrogen. Many projects are planned to export to Japan, and most of them are engaged with green hydrogen production using renewable energy. The feature of this engagement is that Japanese are playing not just as potential importers, but collaborating with Australian companies in research and development area from a very early phase. We plan to host a face-to-face seminar in the first place, and then bring an opportunity for networking between Japan and Australia, but unfortunately, it had to be canceled due to the current lockdown. When the lockdown is lifted, we'd like to have another opportunity for networking of hydrogen-related businesses between Australia and Japan. Lastly, if audiences click exit when you leave the webinar, the survey form will pop up, so please describe your area of interest, your interest in AJBCC activities, or whatever. We'd like to use it as a reference for our future activities. We would appreciate your cooperation. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Takahara-san. So again, just a final thanks to our audience. As I said, we had a record number of registrations from this. We would love to be able to address all your questions in this session, but unfortunately that's just not possible. But we will endeavor to get back to you and work with our panelists to get responses to you. So thank you very much for your time. If the other panelists could just log on to their video and join me as we finish up, I think the AJBCC will organize a closing photo for the session and we can wrap up. Trudy, if you're okay. Okay, I think we're good for that. Thank you again to all our panelists and to our opening and closing speakers. I hope this will be the first of many such sessions with the Australia-Japan Business Cooperation Committee and with JETRO. There's certainly a lot of bilateral collaboration and a lot of topics to cover. Please give us your feedback as to what you would like to hear about next. Thank you, everyone. That ends this session.